Once every 4 years, the entire planet stops for the same thing. Billions of people. One ball. One trophy. It is the closest thing the human race has ever had to a single shared heartbeat. And once every 4 years, like clockwork, something else happens too. The arrests, the leaked files, the sealed indictments. Men in expensive suits walked out of luxury hotels before sunrise, while the world pretends to be surprised all over again. We tell ourselves the same comforting story every time. Bad luck. A few greedy officials, a handful of rotten apples that slip through. Clean them out, bring in honest people, write some new rules, and the game gets clean again. But here is the part nobody wants to sit with. We have cleaned them out, over and over, for decades. New presidents, new promises, new committees. And somehow the next tournament always arrives wrapped in the exact same suspicions as the last one. That is not bad luck. That is a pattern. And patterns this stubborn never come from people. They come from systems. So let me ask you something that might change the way you read every headline about this sport for the rest of your life. What if the corruption you keep hearing about was never the disease? What if it is only the symptom, the predictable output of a machine that was built, piece by piece, to produce exactly this? Because the real story was never about a few men who broke the rules. It is about a structure where following the rules and following the money leads honest people straight into betrayal. So here is the question this entire video is going to answer. How do you build an organization so perfectly that corruption stops being a crime committed against it and becomes the most rational thing anyone inside it can do? Let's open the machine. To understand why this keeps happening, you have to stop looking at the scandals. Forget the names, forget the headlines. We need to back all the way up and look at the shape of the thing itself. So picture a pyramid. At the very bottom, you have the kids. The dusty fields, the public parks, the goals made of 2 backpacks, hundreds of millions of people who play this game for nothing, just because they love it. That is the foundation. That is where all the value actually comes from. Above them sit the clubs. Above the clubs, the national leagues. Above the leagues, in each country, there is one body that governs the entire sport inside that nation. One association that decides who plays, who referees, who gets to wear the national shirt. And above all of those national bodies, sitting alone at the very top of the pyramid, there is a single organization that governs the whole sport on Earth. One. Just one. Now hold that picture in your mind, because this is the first thing almost nobody stops to notice. In most parts of life, when something is valuable, competitors show up. If one company sells you a bad phone, another company sells you a better one. If one airline treats you badly, you fly the other one. Competition is the thing that keeps power honest. It is the pressure that forces the people at the top to actually care what you think. But at the top of this pyramid, there is no competition. There is no second world governing body you can switch to. There is no rival World Cup down the street with cheaper tickets and cleaner officials. The most beloved event on the planet has exactly one supplier. And that supplier answers to no one above it. Because there is no one above it. That is the first brick in the machine. A global monopoly over something billions of people love. Now, here is where it gets stranger. You would think an organization that controls something this enormous would be a sprawling empire, run by thousands. It is not. The core of it is small. Shockingly small. The real power sits in the hands of a tiny number of people, sitting on committees, in rooms most of us will never see. And those people are chosen by a vote. This is the second brick, and it is the one that matters most, so I want you to really hold on to it. The leadership at the top is elected by the member nations of the world, and here is the rule that quietly shapes everything that follows. Every nation gets one vote. 1. Sounds fair, doesn't it? Sounds almost noble. The footballing superpower, with its 100 million players and its billion-dollar leagues, walks into the room, and it gets one vote. And a tiny island nation, with a single muddy pitch and a few hundred registered players, walks into that same room, and it gets exactly one vote too. Equal, identical, the giant and the speck, side by side, each holding the same single ballot. Remember that detail. Because it is going to come back, and when it does, everything you thought was generosity is going to start looking like something else entirely. There is one more piece to put on the table before we go deeper. This organization, the one sitting at the top of the pyramid, controlling the most lucrative event in the history of sport, an event that generates billions upon billions of dollars. This organization is, on paper, a non-profit. Read that again. A non-profit, the same legal category as a local food bank or a children's charity. An entity that is not supposed to exist to make money for owners or shareholders, but to serve the game. To take what it earns and pour it back down the pyramid, into the fields, into the kids, into the future of the sport. That is the promise written into its very foundation. The money flows up from the bottom, from the fans, the broadcasters, the sponsors, and it is supposed to flow back down to everyone. A great river of money, gathered at the top, and then returned to the people who love the game. So now you can see the full map. A monopoly with no competition above it. A small group at the top holding immense power. A leadership chosen by a one nation, one vote system that treats giants and specks as equals. And a mountain of money that, by its own rules, is supposed to be shared. On paper, it is almost beautiful. A global democracy of football, where the smallest nation has the same voice as the biggest, and the wealth is spread to all. But a machine is never just its blueprint. A machine is what happens when you turn it on. When you take those four pieces, the monopoly, the small circle of power, the equal vote, and the river of money, and you let real human beings stand inside them, with real incentives pulling at them. And the moment you do that, something extraordinary happens. Those four innocent-looking pieces lock together, and they start to produce a result that no honest person designed, but that almost every person inside the system will eventually be pushed toward. To see how? We need to do the math. Because underneath all of this, there is a piece of arithmetic so simple and so ruthless that once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. And that arithmetic is where we go next. Let's go back to that one rule. One nation, one vote. Now I want you to stop being a fan for a minute and start thinking like someone who wants to run this organization. Someone who wants to sit at the very top of the pyramid, hold the most powerful job in world sport, and keep that job for as long as possible. What do you need? You don't need to be the best administrator. You don't need the cleanest record or the boldest vision. You need one thing, and one thing only. You need votes. More than half of them. So let's count. There are roughly 200 member nations in this system, which means to win, and to keep winning, you need the support of just over 100 of them. 100 yeses. That is the entire game. That is the only number that matters. Now here is the question that cracks the whole thing open. Where are those 100 votes? A handful of them are the giants. the wealthy footballing nations with their enormous leagues and their proud traditions. But there are only a few of those. Count the rich, powerful football nations on Earth, and you don't get anywhere near 100. You get maybe 20, maybe 30, if you're generous. So where is the rest of your majority? It's everywhere else. It's in the small nations, the tiny ones, the islands, the developing countries, the places where football is loved just as fiercely, but where the National Association runs on almost nothing. There are far, far more small nations than large ones. The majority of the votes, the majority that decides everything, does not live with the giants. It lives with the small. And every one of those small nations holds a vote that weighs exactly as much as Germany's, exactly as much as Brazil's, exactly as much as the proudest, richest football nation you can name. Now bring back the other piece from our map. The river of money, the billions that flow up to the top, and that are supposed to flow back down. Remember who controls the taps on that river. The person at the top. The very person who needs those 100 votes to stay where they are. Do you see it yet? Do you see the shape forming? Here is the arithmetic, laid bare. The person who controls the money is the same person who needs the votes, and the votes they need most are held by the nations who need the money most. One side has something the other side desperately wants, and the other side has the one thing that decides who stays in power. So watch what happens, with total honesty, with no villain required. The man at the top stands up and says, "I am going to increase the development funds. Every association on Earth will receive more money than ever before. Millions sent directly to your federation to grow the game in your country." Is that corruption? Listen carefully, because this is the genius of it and the horror of it. On paper, that is not a crime. That is generosity. That is the nonprofit doing exactly what it was built to do, taking the money and sending it back down the pyramid. He can stand in front of the cameras and call it investment in football, and he would be telling the truth. But now sit in the chair of the small nation receiving that money. The funds arrive. They are real. They keep your federation alive. And in a year, there is, and the man who sends you those millions, who could send you even more next year, or could quietly send you less, that man would like your vote. Nobody has to say a word. No envelope of cash changes hands. No law is broken. The incentive does all the talking. You vote for the hand that feeds you, because the hand that feeds you is the hand you cannot afford to lose. And so 100 small nations, each acting completely rationally, each protecting their own survival, deliver 100 votes to the man with the money. That is the machine running exactly as built. And here is the part I need you to really feel. There is no evil mastermind required for this. You could replace the person at the top with a literal saint, and the arithmetic would not change. The saint would still need 100 votes. The votes would still live with the small nations. The small nations would still need the money. And the saint would still control the money. The pressure to use the river of funds to secure loyalty would press on the saint exactly the way it presses on everyone else. This is why the scandals never stop. We keep treating the problem as a moral failure of individuals, so we keep trying to fix it by replacing individuals. Throw out the bad man, bring in the good one. But the machine does not care who is standing inside it. The incentives are baked into the structure, and the structure stays. We change the driver, and we are baffled when the car keeps going to the same place. One nation, one vote sounded like the purest democracy imaginable, but marry it to a monopoly on money, and a single person controlling that money, and it quietly transforms into something else. It becomes a marketplace, where loyalty is the product, and development funds are the currency, and the most powerful position in world sport is the prize. It is not a flaw in the system. Read that one more time. It is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. And once you understand that, the next question is impossible to avoid. If this is really how the machine works, if it has worked this way for as long as anyone can remember, then surely, somewhere in history, we can watch it happen. We can catch the machine in the act. We can, and we're about to. So far, we've been talking about one vote, the vote for who runs the organization. But there is a second vote inside this machine, and it is worth so much more that it makes the first one look like pocket change. The vote for who hosts the tournament. Think about what it means for a country to host the World Cup. For 1 month, you are the center of the world. Billions of eyes, new stadiums, new airports, new highways, built with billions of dollars in contracts. A spotlight on your nation that no amount of advertising could ever buy. Hosting the World Cup is one of the most valuable prizes a country can win. And who decides which country gets it? For most of this organization's history, that decision was not made by the hundreds of member nations. It was made by a tiny committee, a small circle of powerful men sitting in a room casting secret votes. Now run our arithmetic again, but turn the dial higher. A prize worth billions, a decision made by a handful of people, and no real transparency over how they choose. You don't need to be a cynic to see what that creates. You've already seen the machine. A small group of voters, an enormous prize, and weak oversight. That is not a safeguard. That is a target painted on the entire process. And here is where the story stops being a theory and becomes a matter of public record. On a spring morning, plainclothes officers walked into a luxury hotel in Zurich. It was the kind of hotel where the most powerful men in world football stayed when they came to town. As the sun came up, those officers led senior officials out through side doors, some shielded behind bedsheets to hide their faces from the cameras. Acting on a request from prosecutors across the Atlantic, they made the arrests that finally pulled the curtain back. What the United States Department of Justice laid out in its indictment was not a story about one bad apple. Prosecutors described a criminal enterprise spanning 2 generations of football officials, and bribes and kickbacks totaling well over $100 million, stretching back across more than 2 decades. Officials were charged with racketeering, the same legal framework built to take down organized crime. And on the same day, prosecutors in Switzerland opened their own separate investigation. This one aimed directly at how the hosting rights for 2 upcoming World Cups had been awarded. Sit with that for a second. The very process for choosing where the world's biggest tournament would be played was now under criminal investigation. The crown jewel decision, the billion-dollar prize, and the details that came out were almost too on the nose. One senior official admitted to his role in a scheme involving a $10 million payment connected to a vote for which country would host a World Cup. $10 million. Tied to a single hosting decision. That is the marketplace we described, made flesh. The prize was a tournament. The currency was the vote. And the vote, it turned out, had a price. This is the machine, caught in the act. Not theorized. Not alleged by some conspiracy theorist online. Documented, indicted, and in many cases confessed to and convicted in courts of law. But here is the part that should genuinely disturb you, and it is the whole reason this case matters for everything that comes after. This was supposed to be the end of it. This was the great reckoning. The cleansing fire, The biggest corruption scandal in the history of the sport, splashed across every front page on Earth. Officials arrested, careers destroyed, the leadership swept away, new presidents promising a new era, new rules, new committees, new transparency, new everything. If ever there was a moment to break the machine and rebuild it clean, this was it. The whole world was watching, and the whole world demanded change. So tell me, did it work? You already know the answer. Because here we are, years later, and the suspicions never left. New officials in new countries, still being banned and sentenced for misusing the very same funds. The same questions about the same money, asked again and again. The faces changed, the headlines changed, the machine did not. And that is the lesson hiding inside this case, the one we have to carry into the rest of this story. We caught it. We exposed it. We arrested it. We replaced the people running it. We did everything our instincts told us to do. And it still came back. Because we treated a structural problem as if it were a moral one. We pulled out the rotten apples and were shocked when the tree grew more. So if catching the criminals didn't fix it, and replacing the leaders didn't fix it, then a harder question starts to take shape. Maybe the problem was never the people at all. Maybe the problem is sitting somewhere much closer to home. Because here is what we haven't talked about yet. This whole machine, the monopoly, the votes, the river of money, it doesn't run on nothing. It runs on fuel. And that fuel comes from somewhere very specific. It comes from you. We've spent this whole time looking up at the top of the pyramid, the committees, the votes, the men in the hotel. But every machine needs fuel, and this one is no different. So let's follow the fuel. Let's follow the money. And to do that, we have to look down, all the way down, to the bottom of the pyramid. To the fans. To you. Here is something most people never stop to think about. That organization at the top doesn't actually make anything. It doesn't manufacture a product. It doesn't grow food or build cars. What it owns is something far stranger and far more powerful. It owns access to a feeling. The feeling of belonging to something enormous, of standing in a crowd of strangers who for 90 minutes become your family. Of watching your country, your colors, on the biggest stage that exists. That feeling is the most valuable thing the machine controls, and it is the one thing it did not create. You created it. The fans created it. Over more than a century of love poured into this game from the bottom up. The machine simply stands at the top and sells it back to you. Now remember the very first brick we laid down. The monopoly. There is only one supplier of this feeling. One World Cup. No competitor. And once you understand that, the way prices behave stops being a mystery and starts being a math problem. Think about a normal business. A restaurant that gouges you on the bill is terrified you won't come back next week. A store that treats you badly knows you'll shop somewhere else tomorrow. That fear, the fear of losing you, is what keeps ordinary businesses honest. They need you to return. They are playing a long game, and your loyalty is the prize. But now look at this machine through the same lens. The tournament comes once every 4 years. 4 years. The organization selling you that ticket does not need you back next week. It doesn't even need you back next year. It needs you back in 4 years, by which time you'll have forgotten the sting, because the longing will be stronger than the memory. So the incentive is not to build a lifelong relationship with you. The incentive is to extract as much from you as humanly possible, right now in this one window and let the next window worry about itself. A business that needs you back tomorrow has to be kind to you. A business that only needs you back in 4 years can afford to squeeze. And when that business is also the only place on earth you can get what you want, the squeeze has no natural limit. There is no rival to undercut it. There is nowhere else for you to go. You either pay what they ask, or you go without the thing you love most. That is why the cost of being a fan keeps climbing. Not because of one greedy decision, but because the structure rewards extraction and punishes restraint. Any official who said, "Let's keep this affordable, let's protect the ordinary supporter," would be leaving enormous sums of money on the table. Money the machine is built to gather and send up the pyramid. The system doesn't just allow the squeeze, it pressures everyone inside it to perform the squeeze. And it doesn't stop at the ticket. Watch how it ripples outward into your real life. The flight you book spikes in price because everyone is flying to the same place at the same time. The hotel triples its rate because it can. The trains, the parking, the food, the jersey for your kid, every layer marks itself up, riding the same wave of demand the machine created. You set out to share one beautiful experience with the people you love, and you find yourself doing arithmetic at the kitchen table, wondering how a game you've loved your whole life became a luxury you have to save for, or borrow for, or simply give up on. And here is the quiet cruelty in it. The people who love this game the most are very often the people who can least afford to chase it. The fan whose nation only reaches this stage once in a generation. The parent who wants to give their child the memory they had as a child. These are exactly the people the structure prices out first. The deeper your devotion, the more the machine can charge you for it. Because devotion is the one thing you cannot shop around for. So when you hear the outrage, the headlines about impossible prices, the fans priced out of their own dream, understand what you're really looking at. You are not looking at a one-time scandal. You are looking at the bottom of the pyramid, feeling the full weight of everything stacked on top of it. The monopoly, the lack of competition, the once in 4 years logic, all of it pressing down through the layers until it lands, finally, on a single fan staring at a screen, asking how this got so expensive. The fuel was always you. Your love, your money, your longing. It flows up to the top, gathers into that great river we talked about, and then, supposedly, flows back down to the game. Which raises the only honest question left. If the problem is this clear, and the pain is this real, then why does nobody just fix it? The solution seems so obvious. Cap the prices. Open up the voting. Force transparency. We can all see what's wrong, so why does it never get repaired? The answer is harder than you think. And it's where we go next. By now you might be feeling a kind of frustration. Because the problems seem so obvious, and so do the answers. Just cap the prices. Just open up the voting. Just force them to show the books. Just bring in honest people. We can all see the fixes from here. So why, after decades, has none of it worked? Let's take the obvious solutions one by one and watch what the machine does to each. Start with the simplest. Just replace the bad people with good ones. We already ran this experiment, in real life, in the most dramatic way imaginable. We arrested them. We indicted them. We swept out the leadership and brought in reformers promising a clean new era. And we already saw the result. The faces changed, and the pattern didn't. Because, and this is the heart of everything, the incentives don't live in the people. They live in the structure. A good person dropped into a corrupting structure faces the same pressures the bad person did. They still need the votes. The votes still belong to the nations who need the money. The money is still theirs to give. You can change every name on every door, and the arithmetic waiting inside those rooms is exactly the same. Fine, you say. Then change the voting. Get rid of one nation, one vote. Give the big footballing nations more weight, so a giant can't be outvoted by 100 tiny associations being kept happy with development funds. It sounds reasonable, but think about who would have to approve that change. The people who would have to vote to reduce the power of the small nations are the small nations. You would be asking 100+ members to voluntarily surrender the single, most valuable thing they possess, their equal vote. The thing that makes the powerful court them in the first place. No group on earth votes to make itself powerless. The very system that needs reform is the system that holds the only key to reforming it. The lock and the key are the same object. All right then, force transparency. Make them publish every audit, account for every dollar of development money, so the funds can't quietly double as a tool for buying loyalty. Also reasonable, also stuck. Because who writes the transparency rules and who enforces them? The organization itself. We keep imagining there's a referee, some higher authority that can blow the whistle and impose the fix. But go back to the very top of our pyramid. There is no one above it. It is a private body, governing itself, accountable to no government, because it belongs to no country, and answerable to no competitor, because there isn't one. Asking it to police itself is asking the machine to choose to run worse. Occasionally, under enough pressure, it will perform a reform, a new committee, a new code, a new pledge. But performing a reform and surrendering power are not the same thing, and the machine knows the difference even when we don't. Then surely governments can step in. And this is where people put their last hope. Surely a powerful country can force the issue, cap the prices, regulate the whole thing. And sometimes, in small ways, they do. A single region can pass a law that protects its own fans, and it genuinely helps inside that region. But the machine is global, and governments are not. It simply moves. It holds its event wherever the rules are loosest, structures its money wherever the oversight is thinnest, and shrugs off any single nation's law because no single nation owns the World Cup. A global monopoly playing against local referees will win every time, simply by changing fields. Do you see the trap now? Every obvious solution runs into the same wall. The thing that needs to be reformed is the only thing with the authority to reform it, and it has every incentive not to. The monopoly removes the pressure of competition. The self-governance removes the pressure of a referee. The global reach removes the pressure of any law. We are trying to discipline a thing that has carefully, structurally, removed every source of discipline that could ever be applied to it. And I want to be honest with you about something, because it's easy to walk away from this feeling cynical, and cynicism is lazy. The machine does do good. Real money does flow down the pyramid. Fields really do get built. Kids in poor countries really do get equipment and coaching they'd never otherwise have. That is true, and it matters. But notice how that very good becomes part of the lock. The development funds are simultaneously the genuine gift and the instrument of control. The same river that nourishes the game is the river that buys the loyalty. You cannot simply shut it off, because shutting it off would hurt the very people at the bottom you're trying to protect. The machine has fused its generosity and its self-interest into a single flow, so that defending one means defending the other. That is what makes this so much harder than a story about greedy men. Greedy men you can arrest. A structure that turns generosity into control, that makes its own reform impossible by design, that removes every referee before the game even begins. that you cannot simply arrest. You can only understand it. And once you understand it here, in the world of football, a much larger and stranger thought starts to creep in. Because this exact shape, this exact machine, is not unique to sport at all. You've seen it before. You just didn't know its name. Let's name the shape we've been looking at. Strip away the football, the trophies, the stadiums, and look at the pure structure underneath. What do we have? 1. A monopoly over something people deeply want, with no competitor to keep it honest. 2. A small circle of insiders at the top who govern themselves and answer to no outside referee. A flow of money or benefits that those insiders control and can use to buy the loyalty of whoever keeps them in power. And 4. A reach so wide that no single government can fully discipline it. Put those 4 together, and you get a predictable result. Not because the people are evil, but because the structure rewards self-dealing and removes every check that would stop it. We watched it produce decades of scandal in football. But here is the unsettling part. Once you can see this shape, you start seeing it everywhere. Think about any organization that becomes the only gatekeeper to something millions of people need. The only platform where you can reach an audience. The only network everyone you know is already on. The moment it has no real rival, the same logic switches on. It no longer has to keep you happy to keep you. It can extract more, give less, and you stay. Because where else would you go? The absence of an exit is the absence. Think about any body that is allowed to police itself. An industry that writes its own rules and inspects its own conduct. A profession that decides who gets to join it and who gets disciplined. On paper, self-governance sounds efficient. Who understands the work better than the insiders? But remove the outside referee, and the same drift begins. The rules quietly start serving the people who write them. The watchdog is paid by the very thing it's supposed to watch. Think about how loyalty gets bought without a single bribe ever changing hands. A powerful entity controls a flow of benefits, funding, access, contracts, attention, and the people who depend on that flow learn. Without ever not to bite the hand that feeds them. No corruption in the cartoon sense. No envelopes of cash. Just an incentive structure so well built that everyone inside it polices themselves and calls it loyalty or pragmatism or just the way things are. And here is why I wanted to walk you all the way through the football, because it is the clearest, most documented version of this shape we have. We can point to the arrests. We can read the indictments. We can see in black and white how the machine ran. And once you've seen it clearly in one place, you can recognize its silhouette in a dozen others where it's better hidden. Let me pause here for just a moment. Because if you've stayed with me this far, you're not a casual viewer. You're the kind of person who wants to understand how things actually work underneath the noise. Not to be handed a villain and told who to be angry at, but to see the real machinery for yourself and make up your own mind. That's rare, and it's the whole reason this channel exists. If that's you, consider subscribing and sticking around, because we do this every single time we take the thing everyone's shouting about, and we quietly take it apart to show you the gears. No agenda, just the machine laid bare. All right, let's bring this home, because there's one final move the shape makes, and it's the most important one of all. It teaches you to look in the wrong direction. Every time one of these machines produces a scandal, the story we're handed is always about a person. A villain, a greedy official, a corrupt executive, a bad actor who betrayed, and we focus all our anger there, on the face, on the name. We demand they be removed. We celebrate when they fall. And then we move on, satisfied that justice was done. while the structure that produced them, and that will produce the next one just like them, sits perfectly untouched. This is the machine's greatest defense. Not secrecy, not money, misdirection. As long as we keep believing the problem is a person, we will keep applying the one solution that never works, removing the person, and we will keep being astonished when nothing changes. The villain is real, but the villain is also a magic trick. While you're watching the hand holding the bribe, you're not watching the structure that made the bribe the rational thing to do. And that's the thought I can't shake, the one this whole story has been building toward. We are surrounded by these machines, in sport, in business, in the institutions that shape our daily lives. We've trained ourselves to spot bad apples and demand they be thrown out. But we've barely trained ourselves to see the orchard, the structure, the incentives, the shape that quietly turns ordinary people into the next scandal. So let's go back, one last time, to where we started. To that strange feeling we have every 4 years, when the tournament arrives and the suspicions arrive right alongside it. We thought we were watching a story about corrupt men. We weren't. We were watching a machine do exactly what it was built to do. And now that you can see it, the real question isn't about football at all. So let's go back to the beginning. To that question I asked you when we opened the machine. How do you build an organization so perfectly that corruption stops being a crime committed against it and becomes the most rational thing anyone inside it can do? Now you know. You build it brick by brick. You start with a monopoly. Control over something billions of people love with no competitor to keep you honest. You hand the power at the top to a small circle, and you let them answer to no one above them, because you make sure there is no one above them. You give them a great river of money, and you write the rules so that the same hands that control the money are the hands that need the votes. And then you make the whole thing global so that no single government, no single law, no single referee can ever fully reach it. And then you do the most important thing of all. You walk away. Because you don't need to corrupt anyone. You've built a structure where following the incentives leads honest people, step by step, into the exact behavior you'd have had to bribe them for. The machine corrupts on its own. It doesn't need a villain. It manufactures them. We watched it happen. We watched the prize of hosting turn into a marketplace. We watched the equal vote turn into a currency. We watched the fans at the bottom become the fuel that feeds the whole. We watched the great reckoning come, the arrests, the indictments, the promises of a new era, and we watched the machine absorb it all and keep running. Because we kept reaching for the people when the problem was the shape they were standing in. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being a story about football. Because the shape doesn't care what it's made of. Pour football into it, you get one kind of scandal. Pour something else in, an industry, a platform, an institution, and you get another. But it's the same shape, the same monopoly, the same self-governance, the same bought loyalty, the same reach beyond the law's grasp. We have built a world full of these machines, and we've trained ourselves to do exactly one thing when they misbehave. We look for the bad man, we find him, we remove him, and we wait, baffled, for the next one. Here's what I keep coming back to. The most dangerous corruption was never the kind that breaks the rules. It's the kind that follows them. The official who takes the bribe is breaking the rules, and we know how to deal with that. We have police, courts, prisons. But the system that makes taking the bribe the smart, rational, almost inevitable choice? That follows every rule perfectly. It is legal. It is functioning exactly as designed. And there is no one to arrest. Because no one, individually, did anything wrong. They just stood inside the machine and let it pull them. That's the uncomfortable gift of seeing the shape. You can never unsee it. The next time a scandal breaks, in sport, in business, in the institutions around you, and the whole world rushes to point at one face, one name, one villain, you'll feel that small pause. You'll find yourself looking past the person, to the structure standing behind them. You'll ask the question almost no one asks. Not who did this, but what was built here that made this the obvious thing to do. And that question changes how you read everything. Every headline, every outrage, every time you're handed a villain and told where to aim your anger, you'll wonder what's standing just out of frame, doing exactly what it was built to do, while you watch the hand holding the bribe. The men in the hotel were real. The crimes were real. But they were never the story. They were the symptom. The machine was the story all along. We just kept arresting the smoke and leaving the fire exactly where it was.